Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started in about 1 minute with today's program. Thank you for joining us today. As we are letting people into today's webinar, we will get started in about 1 more minute. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started with today's webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us today. I'm Brad Sears, Associate Dean of Public Interest Law at UCLA Law. We have such an exciting program today. It is the first day of our second annual Public Service Challenge. And if you haven't signed up to participate in the challenge yet, I encourage you to do so. We're trying to activate all of our law students, alums, faculty, and staff to engage in public interest or public service work between now and November 3rd. There are activities for lawyers and non-lawyers. It's a great opportunity to show kind of what the UCLA Law community can do to give back to Los Angeles. And some of the ways you can give back are going to be highlighted in today's panel, which will be focused on addressing the eviction crisis in Los Angeles. But before we jump, and if you see in the chat, there's a link there for you to find out more information and to sign up for the challenge. We have about 30 different opportunities there. But before we jump into the panel, I am beyond thrilled to announce today the launch of the Judge Rand Schrader Pro Bono program. A number of people have worked on developing and raising the money for this specific program over the last couple of years, including our great Dean, Jennifer Mnuchin, and our Head of External Affairs, John Sonego. And it's really built on the legacy of service that our students, UCLA Law students, have led over the last several decades, supported by faculty and staff. And it is based on that that we were able to raise over $850,000 this last year in honor of Judge Rand Schrader. I'd specifically like to thank David Bonnet and the David Bonnet Foundation for the leadership gift to create the new program. The Luskin family that's been so generous to UCLA, as well as the law school for supporting the program. And one of our alums, Sean Kravitz, Robert DiBiletto, and Rob Saltzman for their generous gifts, as well as dozens of other people who supported the program. The focus of the Rand Schrader Pro Bono program will be really to amplify the great pro bono work that our students, faculty, and staff are already engaged in, and really take it to a new level, including by addressing the eviction crisis in Los Angeles. I did not know Rand Schrader. He was an alum of UCLA School of Law. He was David Bonet's partner, the generous donor behind much of the program, and truly made an impression both while he was at a law student and in Los Angeles. And we put together a short video for the beginning of our program to share his life and the impact that he made and how his legacy will be continued on through the pro bono program. So if we can play the video.
In 1972, the fairly new Gay Community Services Center, it was called then, had this group of law students. There were like 8 or 9 guys who were gay, and they met at the center. I was in the public defender's office, and I was asked if I would come to one of their meetings and meet with them. Somewhere inside of me, I knew that if I went there, my life would change. I met these law students, Barry Coppolo, Tom Coleman, and Randy, and they got me involved.
As Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, once said, all it takes is a handful of people to change the world. Somebody had to do it. We had to step forward, and for ourselves and for others who would come after us.
Randy started his career in the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office with a keen sense of social justice coming out of UCLA Law School. Randy was very proud to represent those marginalized communities that may not have had a voice or a face represented in the courtroom.
When I campaigned for city attorney, I said that I was going to open up the office to minorities and women and people who had been excluded in the past. And I remember sitting down with them and saying, Rand, you know, you're going to be watched. We're both taking a risk here, you and I.
It sounds like nothing today. You know, now in 2021, it sounds like nothing. It was a big deal. It was a very, very big deal.
I mean, obviously, he was a zealous advocate for his community, but he was more than that. He was interested in justice for everybody. It was who he was that made the difference, not what he was. I respected the hell out of it.
Rand brought out the best in everyone who knew him, both in the courtroom and in life.
In the early 1980s, he and his colleague, Steve Lax, were the first 2 openly gay judges appointed in California by Jerry Brown. And this was a groundbreaking set of appointments, both, of course, for Steve Lax and Rand Schrader, but also for the LGBT community as a whole.
Yes, Rand was a trailblazer. He was a gifted and brilliant lawyer, but more importantly to me, Rand was the warmest, most empathic and kind human being you could ever expect to meet.
I was very fortunate to have Rand as both a friend and a mentor. In our friendship, Rand introduced my late husband and me to his large group of wonderful friends. As a mentor, Rand encouraged me to be out and politically active, and thereby changed my life for the better.
You know, I know me a little bit, and Randy I knew a lot, and basically when it comes down to it, we're people, you know? You can be a judge, you can be in the business, in Hollywood, you can be anything, but basically we all are people. And if you're a good person, that's what makes the difference. And Randy Schrader was a good person, and I miss him. And someday we'll be together again. Not too soon, I hope.
Our courage together and our courage individually makes me glow with the sense that we have done the best we could. Not me, not you, but all of us.
When you think of everything that Judge Rand Schrader did during his life and how he devoted himself to really helping the most vulnerable parts of the Los Angeles community at that time, it is really an honor to be able to recognize his legacy through the creation of the Judge Rand Schrader Pro Bono program.
And what that means for us is that there is so much opportunity to make a difference. During my time at UCLA Law, I had the opportunity to direct the Los Angeles HIV Law and Policy Project. We addressed over 340 matters through leveraging pro bono services, and we trained law students and attorneys on how to deliver those legal services.
During this pandemic, the legal services we provide to marginalized communities at the Eviction Defense Network are more important than ever. With the help of the Rand Schrader Pro Bono program, public interest-minded attorneys like myself can continue to provide the legal help that truly matters.
I'm very excited about the Rand Schrader Pro Bono program and its supportive service learning. So many students have reported that their service learning trips to process asylum applications in Dilley, Texas, and the California border have been life-changing. The work and the connections made during these trips have been the inspiration for successful public interest fellowship applications.
When UCLA students help transgender people with their name change, they help people to prevent discrimination and harassment. UCLA students' legal clinics are truly changing lives.
I'm the co-executive director of El Centro, which is the largest student-run organization here on campus. We place over 250 student volunteers into 12 different clinics across Los Angeles. Supporting the pro bono efforts here at UCLA will allow us to broaden the support that we can provide to our organizational partners and their clients.
Randy was smart, he was funny, and he was fierce. He was 49 years old when he died. And this fund will help ensure the continuation of Randy's legacy. And what the fund does is harness the power of the 1,200 UCLA law students and the thousands UCLA law student alumni, faculty, and staff around supporting the pro bono efforts within the programs at the UCLA Law School, but also through a pro bono effort supporting social justice initiatives throughout other organizations in Los Angeles County.
This is just a really excellent platform for students as they move into their professional lives and really helping them to understand their identity as attorneys and the kind of lawyer that they want to be.
The Rand Schrader Pro Bono program is just an incredible addition to our school. I cannot wait to see the program in action and to celebrate the good that I know it's going to be able to do.
I was never that aware of myself as a role model. I was, focused on just doing the things that I felt were necessary to do. But I see now that we have helped create goals for young people who maybe have bigger dreams than we ever had.
So thank you, David. Thank you, Jeff and Barbara, who made that video. Thanks to everyone who knew Rand, who shared your experiences about him with us and made us and really brought home what an incredible alum, lawyer, advocate that he was. And we're particularly grateful for all the work that the new program will allow us to do. And I just have one more exciting announcement for the day before we jump into the panel, which is the moderator of today's panel will be Grace Ming, who is our inaugural Judge Round Schrader Pro Bono Director. So let's hear it out there in Zoom land for Grace. Grace comes to us from the U.S. programs of Human Rights Watch, where she's a researcher and an advocate. She's worked in coalition with communities, other organizations, including students and a number of people at the law school. Her experience as a lawyer ranges from helping migrant farm workers to doing immigration and crimmigration work. And what really stood out in our process for welcoming Grace was just that she's an outstanding lawyer. She's an outstanding public interest lawyer. She is just innately kind and compassionate, and that she has made a priority throughout her career to help students and junior attorneys. And we couldn't think of a better person to lead our new program. So thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Brad. That is a really kind introduction. And I am so moved having seen this video of Judge Rand Schrader. I feel so honored to be the inaugural director of this program. I'm really excited to moderate the panel today, where the panelists will be speaking on an issue that is so urgent and so important to our community. We have Gary Blasey, Stefano Medina, and Nisha Vyas with us. And I am going to be casual and ask them to introduce themselves and to tell us about their present housing work. Gary, can you start?
Sure. So I first helped a tenant with an eviction case when I was a volunteer paralegal at a community storefront in Echo Park, and that was almost exactly 50 years ago. And I've been working on these issues related to housing and evictions and homelessness basically ever since. I retired from the UCLA faculty after 21 years in 2012, and well, it was sort of a retirement. It's gotten to the point that my significant other says that I need a sabbatical from my retirement, and I'm beginning to think that might make sense. The housing related work that I'm doing now is as follows. In May of 2020, just after the pandemic began to show up in the unemployment numbers, I published a paper with the UCLA Luskin Institute on inequality and democracy, and that paper predicted that unless there was major government intervention, 365,000 households in LA County would be at terrible risk of eviction. So that was then. Now is now. The current situation is that as of 2 weeks ago, in the LA metro area, there were 550,000 adults and 275,000 children in rental households that were behind on the rent. Those households don't look like a cross-section of the LA metro area. The rate of being behind on the rent for white households is 3.8%. For black households, it's 15.5%. So it's about 4 or 5 times as much, and that tracks many of the other racial disparities that you see throughout the system. When we talk about what happens when you get behind the rent, that is, unless you have a really unusual landlord, you will be evicted if you don't pay the rent, if the government will let you. And there have been various moratoria and so on that have stopped a lot of evictions, but those moratoria, most of them ended on October 1st, and evictions in earnest began, for non-payment, began to be capable of being filed on October the 1st. So it's important to understand that this eviction process is a lot more complicated now than it was when I dealt with it as a paralegal 50 years ago. It's gotten incredibly complicated, partly as a result of all the laws that have been enacted during the COVID epidemic and other rent control laws and other legislation. It's no longer the fairly simple process that it was. And the process is very difficult for most people to deal with on their own. You get served with a summons and complaint, and you have 5 days to file your own papers in court, 5 court days. That was a recent so-called reform. But it's almost impossible for tenants these days to file on their own without some kind of assistance. Consequently, most tenants default, meaning that they are unable to answer by the 6th day, and then they can be put out within just 2 or 3 weeks.
I'm thinking, Gary, that sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna.
Yeah.
Hope I'm not too much over my time.
No.
What I've been doing recently is, for the past year, is working to develop an online application that will enable tenants to file their answers remotely, either from a smartphone or a computer, by answering questions, and our application will generate the paperwork. And in LA County, we can file that paperwork electronically for them. So we aim to reduce the number of defaults and give people more time to find lawyers like Stefano.
That is a great segue. So I think, Stefano, you can introduce yourself, and then we'll have Nisha introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stefano Medina. My pronouns are he, L, and I am a 5L, which is what I tell people now, because I graduated from law school 5 minutes ago, and UCLA, for the record. And I don't think it was, and so if I graduated 5 minutes ago, then I guess maybe 10 minutes ago, I was a 1L having lunch with my public interest UCLA Law mentor, an alumni with an incredible amount of experience, who gave me an incredible amount of advice, and who I have seen, their career just sort of skyrocket while I was in law school. And now I'm on a panel with Nisha Vyas, who is the person that I'm talking about, which I think does say something about the public interest, commitment, and identity around UCLA Law. So, I guess what I'll say is that I grew up in Los Angeles. My parents were immigrants from Ecuador. And so I grew up speaking Spanish in my family and my community, and having that immigrant experience really, if my life has taught me anything, it's that community is how you survive. And so gentrification and displacement poses a real threat to low-income communities of color. It's not just the sad story of a tenant being displaced, which is sad, and that has happened in my family, but it's also about the people who are left behind and what kind of resources and civic infrastructure these communities are left with. Every single eviction makes a community easier to gentrify. So right now, I'm working as a Skadden Fellow at the Eviction Defense Network, which is a nonprofit legal service provider that is exclusively dedicated to representing low-income tenants facing eviction. There are a lot of different places, amazing places in the county that provide this legal service to tenants, but the Eviction Defense Network, I think, is known for being one of the few places that this is all we do. And also the workload at the Eviction Defense Network is akin to being a public defender. If you want to work at the Eviction Defense Network, it's because you want to be handed a folder like I was 5 minutes ago. And now I'm coming to you live from the Chatsworth Courthouse, where I just picked a jury. And I didn't know anything about this case a few days ago. So that's the life that the housing attorney leads in Los Angeles County and in California, which is an incredible source of litigation experience, both for students and alumni. I have been practicing law for 5 minutes. This is my 4th jury trial. I've done half a dozen bench trials. I've done dozens of evidentiary hearings. So the litigation experience that you get in this practice area is really spectacular. And unlike being a public defender representing criminal defendants, we almost always win. Right now, the challenge for tenants facing eviction in Los Angeles is both, the laws that need to be improved, but the real challenge is the lack of representation. The unlawful detainer sausage mill depends depends, in order for it to work, it depends on the fact that most tenants are unrepresented. But whereas most unrepresented tenants lose in eviction court in any number of ways, they can get defaulted, they can forget to check a box, any number of ways. But a tenant who is represented by counsel is almost certainly likely to either win at trial or reach a settlement that is in everybody's best interest. And so the outcomes, just by extending legal representation to people, are really extraordinary. And that's why this kind of project is so important. When I first went to UCLA as a 1L, nobody cared about housing. The 1Ls were all interested in other hot button issues. And just in this short time, I've seen that radically change, not only with students who are now emailing me every day because they want trial experience before they graduate, but it's also alumni, many of whom are dedicated to public interest work and have seen how much more this work is getting funded both by the county and private foundations. So the sky is really the limit here. And I think we're at an excellent place in the history of this practice to define the culture and define the model and really set the tone for how zealous our advocacy for this population is going to be in the future. And so then other than the work I do in court, I'm also a land use attorney, which is actually what I went to law school to do and what I'm supposed to be doing, but instead I can't get out of this tie. And so I work on community plan updates, upzoning, just making sure that the development that happens in communities is equitable and is fair for the people who live there rather than, almost explicitly designed to displace them. But at the same time, Eden is working on filing a couple of affirmative complaints. I keep calling my clients the defendants regardless, so that's a habit I'm learning to break. And that work goes to the interesting statutory environment right now. The city of Los Angeles just passed a historic tenant anti-harassment ordinance, and I'm filing a couple of complaints based off of that statute. And also we're expanding our work in temporary restraining order proceedings because landlords have been using all kinds of tactics to get around the COVID-19 pandemic protections. So they get restraining orders against their tenants, they accuse them of gang activity and hope that they'll get a jury that's racist enough to believe the allegations. So I'm a busy boy and it's an interesting time, and I spoke too long, so I'm done.
Thank you, Stefano. Nisha?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone joining us today. My name is Nisha Vyas. I am a proud UCLA Law alum and proud PILP alum. Proud former student of Professor Gary Blasey, who I'm just, I'm so thrilled to be on a panel with, and also, of course, Stefano Medina, who is, he says he's only been practicing for 5 minutes, but he carries himself with an extraordinary amount of confidence and has knowledge of someone who is several years his senior. So I'm very, very proud of hearing the work that Stefano is doing. My current position is as a senior attorney at Western Center on Law and Poverty. Western Center is a nonprofit organization that's been around for more than 50 years, is a statewide advocacy organization committed to racial and economic justice for all Californians. And we work primarily in the areas of health, public benefits, and housing. And I am on the housing team. And as a member on the housing team, when I joined Western Center in March 2020, I had intended to join focusing on equitable community development and fair housing. And because of the pandemic that we've been living with for nearly 2 years now, a lot of the work that I've been doing along with my colleagues on my team is really focusing on the statewide COVID-related eviction protections and fighting tooth and nail to get the protections that we've had, and also supporting local advocates who've been successful in getting local protections for tenants in cities and counties throughout the state. I'm currently on a team representing interveners, ACE Action, and Strategic Actions for a Just Economy in a case defending local eviction protections here in the city of LA against a landlord challenge to the city's protections, as well as representing ACE Action in a case challenging San Diego County's eviction protections. We've done a lot of fighting against landlords pushing back on eviction protections, even in light of a pandemic that has claimed the lives of 700,000 Americans, right? Our work also includes administrative advocacy with state agencies, including the Department of Housing and Community Development and the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, not just on the COVID-related stuff, but on the stuff that we've been advocating for on behalf of low-income Californians and Californians of color, for years and years. And a lot of our work, it also includes, just as I said, working with local advocates to ensure implementation of laws that are intended to protect low-income Californians. And so, our work really spans across a lot of different areas. I myself have, I've been I'm not a 5, I'm a little bit more than a 5L. I've been practicing for almost my entire career on housing rights, and have been sort of a jack of all trades in the housing world, everything from eviction defense to habitability cases to fair housing and to equitable community development. It's all part of a whole. And I'll pause there so we can talk a little bit more about what we're here to talk about.
The breadth of experience on this panel is really impressive. So Gary, before I interrupted you, you were telling us about who is being impacted by the eviction crisis. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a bit more about what has created this crisis and who is impacting.
Sure. So the critical level of the current circumstance obviously comes from the unemployment that resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic, but that came on top of already long-standing crises. They weren't referred to as crises anymore because they persisted year after year after year. But in the lives of tenants and low-income people, this has been a crisis for a very long time. That's the consequence of very low wages that haven't kept up with inflation for a large number of people, and a housing market inflation that's been over 50% in the last 6 years. And those two things eventually lead to people not being able to pay their rent. Even before COVID-19, a couple of years before, a study revealed that there were about 600,000 people in LA County who were in households that were spending 90% of their income on rent. So people were desperately clinging on to housing at the expense of just about everything else. The other part of that is the dismantling of the social safety net, basically starting with the Clinton welfare reforms, and also looking at the history of general relief, which is for single people the only source of income that they have if they don't have any other source of income. It provides $221 a month, which is exactly the same dollar amount that it provided in 1983. And it would take 6 people on general relief to come up with the rent on the average studio apartment. So it's not surprising that a large number of people, the largest in the country, are homeless and without shelter. And that's inextricably connected to eviction. Evictions are the precipitating cause of virtually all homelessness. And what happens after that depends on a lot of other things. But those are the two main things. And this all takes place in the context of a society and an economy where housing is a commodity and not a necessity or a right. And as with any other commodity, you can have exactly as much as you can afford, which in the case of a lot of people these days is none. So those are what I would say are the major causes, and they're pretty straightforward. And the answers are pretty straightforward, except if you ignore a problem for 40 years, the answer gets more and more expensive.
Stefano, it looked like you're wanting to add something.
So the question is, why is this a problem right now? Well, I'll agree with Gary right off the bat. This has always been a problem. If you look back at the numbers of, so rent burdened is basically if you're paying more than 30% of your income in rent. Severely rent burdened is when it's 50% of your income or higher. When you look at the rent burden rates of the Latinx and African American population in California, things have gotten worse. But you go back to the 50s, to the 60s, and the numbers weren't significantly different. What has changed in the past 20 years is that now Caucasian and wealthier households are also becoming severely rent burdened. So the housing crisis that we've been discussing in California for a decade plus now is really a housing crisis that we're really talking about the housing crisis facing more affluent Californians, which is something that you'll realize very quickly once you start listening to the policy debates and the kind of ideas that are being proposed to address this problem. I'll agree again with Professor Blasey. This problem exists because the system that we have in this country for building housing has never been a system designed for ensuring that safe, affordable, quality housing is available to working class Americans. And that's always been the case. We simply do not have a system, the kind of financial arrangements that are necessary in the real estate market today, especially for residential development, preclude the possibility of renting new units to anybody but the wealthiest among us. And the public funds to create truly low-income housing have never been there. And even if they were there, our local and state governments are so inexperienced in being developers themselves that billions of dollars would almost certainly be wasted if they were ever really allocated. But I think closely related to this question about why we have a housing crisis is why we have gentrification. Because gentrification and the housing crisis are overlap, but they are distinct. Gentrification isn't just housing prices going up, but they are housing prices going up in specific neighborhoods, historic, low income, communities of color, the urban core, the sites of white flight generations ago. It's precisely these neighborhoods where we're seeing the greatest increase in displacement. And why is that? Well, that's another part of the answer here. It's not just the system we have, but the people who are flocking to these low-income neighborhoods are typically college-educated white millennials who grew up in the suburbs and have experienced from their own childhoods the prices of capitalism, the lack of community, the lack of direction, the existential ennui that people of a certain income in this country tend to fall into at that time in their lives. And so these people, this population, are fleeing to low-income communities of color because they correctly recognize that in these communities, there is community. There are all these things that their own backgrounds and personal lives deprive them of. But the irony is that when these affluent, college-educated, white suburbanites move into these neighborhoods, they don't change who they are. They don't change where they spend their money. They don't change the languages they speak. They walk in with a lot of entitlement because they're paying to live there. And very quickly they start, because they're paying so much to live there, to have complaints against the residents housed or otherwise who have lived there for a very long time. So that's just all to say that the causes of the housing crisis are both systemic and historical, but they're also contemporary and individual and moral, and something that every person has to examine for themselves.
If I can add on to that, I think also this is all part and parcel of what Professor Blasey said about, this tearing down of our safety net, right? Blaming poverty and homelessness on the individual or moral failings of the individuals experiencing poverty or experiencing homelessness, I think is seductive for many of us, because it absolves us of having to solve that crisis, right? It's definitely, we still ascribe as a society to the idea that people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And yet, as Martin Luther King Jr. stated, it's a cruel jest to tell a bootless man to pull himself up by his bootstraps, right? And so we see that with the we see that with the criminalization of poverty, the criminalization of homelessness, the unending sweeping of people's belongings once they're on the street, after they've likely survived the trauma of an eviction or displacement from their housing. So I think it's also something that we all have a real obligation to look at and think, okay, we can't keep ascribing this to individual feelings. This 60,000 people sleeping on the street in a night is a systemic crisis, and one that requires a massive amount of public investment and political will, which unfortunately we, sometimes we'll take one step forward, but too many times we take 2 steps back.
Nisha, that actually, I would love to hear more from you on this next question. So, you named, I think, this way that people tend to describe poverty as an individual problem, as a major obstacle. What are some of the other obstacles that you see to addressing the eviction crisis, and what solutions, how can we overcome these obstacles?
Certainly, I mean, one that I'll lift up that has already been mentioned is not having, if we're talking specifically about the eviction crisis, okay, so what are, what resources are there for people who are facing eviction? Just if we start, it doesn't start there, but if we start there, we find that there aren't enough attorneys for people experiencing eviction. We have too many instances where, we've heard as much as 90% of the time a landlord is represented in eviction proceedings, 90% of the time tenants are not represented. And what happens there? We're told that, tenants can engage in self-help. These are, what we call limited jurisdiction proceedings. They they can fill out some forms and be able to represent themselves. That is not the case. These are fast-paced, incredibly intense, cases. I call it litigation on steroids. And Stefano's nodding furiously as he's sitting in a courthouse, as he's picked a jury for a case that he just picked up the file on a couple of days ago, right? I mean, this is not just not having attorneys, but not having maybe access to rental assistance. With COVID, we've just embarked on a very, unprecedented investment in rental assistance, which is still not enough to actually solve the entire crisis, but also is not being doled out fast enough to the individuals who need it the most in order to save their tenancies. Yet, that's something that advocates have been clamoring for a very, very long time. And also having investment in organizers on the street who can actually talk to tenants, and tenants can organize among themselves to be able to fight back, because the more that you create a situation where it's like an individual tenant against their landlord, it's a David and Goliath situation. It really takes people to organize and to fight back in order to be able to really actualize the rights they have on paper. So these are the kinds of things that advocates have been clamoring for a very, very long time. We've had some success locally in getting investment, city and county investments in these. There is a renter's right to counsel in Los Angeles. There are some very significant organizations that are out there organizing tenants, LA Tenants Union among them. So I think that there's, these solutions are, I think, fairly straightforward. At least some of the solutions for the short term. I mean, in the short term crisis. I think we also have to think about this long term issue about how we've shredded the safety net. How do we knit it back together? I'll pause there and let my co-panelists jump in.
I think you covered it pretty well.
Well, I'll just add that one of the things that I hear most often from the bench are judges saying to unrepresented tenants, there are many organizations out there that provide free legal services to tenants facing eviction. You should walk outside the courtroom and ask anybody. And the judges are living in this fantasy world that they've constructed because it's really the only moral way to do it. If it were true that every tenant wanted to, who wanted a lawyer would get one, then maybe the system would be as fair as judges sort of have to think it is in order for them to do their job. But the fact is, there are hundreds of public defenders in the county of Los Angeles, hundreds. That's the number of public defenders the government believes is necessary in order to ensure that criminal defendants in the county are afforded their right to legal representation. I don't think there are more than 30 or 40 full-time UD attorneys in the county, and I probably know most of them. And that's just an almost insignificant amount. We're nowhere near that. And yet most people are unaware. And the problem is actually worse than that. And it's important that the alumni hear this. It's not just the problem that there aren't enough of us, but that if we were to hire 400 new UD attorneys tomorrow, as people seem to be planning to do, as the funding finally starts to arrive for that, well, guess what? None of those people are going to be ready to do a trial for at least a year. Those people are going to have to be intensively trained because doing this job is a difficult job. There's a lot of information you have to know. You can't have a general anxiety disorder if you have this job. Your private life has to be more or less squared away. And what we've just seen in just the past year of the new UD attorneys like me that have been hired to do this job in the past 2 years is that we're all quitting. We're all quitting. My organization hasn't had this problem yet, but agencies across the county who hire people to do this work are losing their staff. And it's because jury trials are beginning again. And these attorneys who should have been spending the past 2 years getting trained to be litigators received under that training because their supervisors who maybe they've done a jury trial once or twice in their careers, but that is nowhere near the amount of experience and training that the new attorneys need. And so if we were to hire the number of people that we actually need, we wouldn't be able to hold on to them because very soon they'll find themselves in front of a judge, picking a jury with no idea how to do it, afraid for their license, and they'll quit. And we've seen that over the past few months. We've lost. The LA County has lost at least a dozen UD attorneys, or maybe 25% of the people who are out here doing it. So that's a significant challenge, and one I think that UCLA, especially our alumni, are poised to meet if we can. I
think that's a great segue to the question of what can law students, faculty, staff, alumni do during the Public Service Challenge. And you painted a really, honestly, a dire picture, a really challenging situation. But I think I would love to hear, you've spoken also about how exciting this work can be, how challenging, how intellectually rigorous. What can UCLA do to address this crisis in the Public Service Challenge in particular and beyond?
Is that me again? Or Nisha? Nisha, you go.
Okay, sure. Get to know the organizations doing this work in this community. Get to know Eviction Defense Network. Get to know, Beth Zedek, Public Counsel, all of the organizations doing the work in this community, Legal Aid Foundation. Get involved in that work. Get a taste of it. I think also what I really want to stress, I hope this has come through in some of our comments, is that not only is our evictions an economic justice issue, they are a racial justice issue. This is what is driving displacement of people of color in our community. We are losing people of color in our community. We're losing them to the streets. We're losing them to other places if they can afford to go to other places. It's exacerbating segregation. It's which is already unforgivably we live in just an unforgivably segregated community already, right? And so get a taste of it. And something that, you know, when we were launching the Renters' Right to Counsel in Los Angeles, we realized this issue that Stefano's bringing up of not having a pipeline of attorneys who are coming into doing specifically eviction defense. So I urge students to really consider this. If you're considering going in and being a public defender because you just really love the idea of doing trials, think about this. This is, you know, I mean, evictions are also a pipeline into, you know, the criminal justice system or criminal injustice system. I mean, I think we really have to, you know, think about all aspects of what faces the communities and the clients that we care about, and make sure that we have the ability to meet their needs, all of their needs. And this is a significant one.
If I could jump in, completely agree with everything that's been said so far. And I would encourage people, even if they don't think they're going to be, you know, a public interest lawyer for a very long time, you can learn more about litigation, litigating UDs for a year, than you will learn by the 7th year, 8th year of your working in a law firm. And people think that this is not serious litigation, but tenants have a constitutional right to a jury trial. And it's one of the few civil cases where you actually have that guarantee. So the stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, they're not money. They are money, but having someone lose their home is probably more devastating than having a member of their family go to jail. And so these are incredibly important cases. Just the last thing I'll add is just an opportunity for folks who are dealing with the challenge and wanting to know what they can do. I mentioned before this online tool that we have. It's designed to be as comprehensible and so on as possible, but it's still going to be too complicated for many folks. And so we are looking for volunteers who can talk to a tenant on the phone and help walk them through it, or provide whatever support that they need, so that at least they can avoid that default and have at least some better chance of connecting with a lawyer. And my hope is that when people talk with someone for an hour or two, they will be interested in continuing to see what happens with that person, and maybe help them shepherd them through a process. We have a bunch of fantastic people doing this work, but as has been said, it's not nearly enough. And doing this sort of thing is one of the few things I think that someone can do without much training, and nevertheless get their toe in the business and begin to see how important this is to people, and reconsider maybe thinking what they were going to do.
Stefano, would you like to add anything to how you can work on this issue in the Public Service Challenge and beyond?
Well, Eden posted a couple of volunteer opportunities, including second chairing me in this trial, but I think that one already got scooped up by someone. But we're in trial multiple times a week, almost every week. So I think it would be beneficial to have a second chair who does nothing other than watch and take notes on how the jury's reacting, which I am too stressed out about to even notice. I never even look at the jury once. It's just too stressful to me. But a second chair sits there and does nothing. Well, you know, helps with certain things, and maybe you write one of the briefs. But if you have a license to practice law, or if you are a 2L who has taken or is taking evidence, then please email me. I'll put my email in the inbox. Trials are fun. They're usually 3 to 4 days, and we have attorneys. So if you drop out at the last minute, you know, it's perfectly fine. Eden and the Inner City Law Center had to unfortunately close one of our weekly clinics because all our attorneys are constantly engaged in trial now. And so it would be a huge help if those of you students or alumni were willing to attend either our Tuesday night clinics or our Saturday morning clinics, attend them a few times, listen to the presentation, learn the advice we give, volunteer to stay at the end of the presentation to go into a breakout room with a tenant and another attorney, at least while you're learning the law. If there was a really good volunteer run housing clinic on a weekly basis, even if it was just online, there are so many people, so many resources out there. The law library emails me every few months begging to give me money to do this, but we don't have the time, we don't have the bodies. And we are committed to doing the 2 clinics that we still do for now. But if you want to help, email me and you will get Zoom links. And eventually, maybe you can do one of the clinics once a month so that Elena can get some sleep. So there's a million things you can do. But I think between helping out at clinics, to writing motions for us, to second chairing a trial whenever you have time, you know, I'm putting my email in the chat. That's what you can do.
If I can add one thing, Grace, and it's a little bit of a plug. My colleague, Diana Prado, who is the founder and executive director of an organization called Heart LA and is a very seasoned, experienced unlawful detainer attorney. She and I offer a J-term course with UCLA Law School on LA housing law and policy. So it's being offered this January. Not to take away from the public service challenge should be your first step.
I think all these suggestions, I love that there are these really concrete ways that people can step in now and do something to support people in our community. And I love that Nisha reminded us, you know, this is not just about economic justice, it's about racial justice. It's such a challenging problem, but I really appreciate how all of you have shown that there's really very specific things that we can all do to work on this issue that is so core. I mean, housing is a human right, you know, Gary, it should not be a commodity. And so it's really inspiring to hear from all of you what we can all do and to see your enthusiasm for supporting members of this community and finding their way to this issue. It looks like we have some questions. Great. So we have a question about what UCLA law classes are recommended for students who want to prepare for a career in housing. And Nisha gave a great plug for her class, but what other classes would you recommend?
Civil procedure, although you don't learn much state law and civil procedure. So see if you can organize some of your friends to talk to the civil procedure faculty to teach you a little bit about California.
So I mean, I just graduated from law school, and unfortunately, there's really nothing that I learned in law school that I use as an attorney, because I didn't really pay attention to evidence, because I thought I was going to be a land use attorney. I should have definitely take evidence, but I think, you know, this is a job that you learn on the job, and so I can't imagine there are too many classes. Even if it was a housing class, you know, I didn't take any trial advocacy when I was in law school, because again, I didn't think I would ever have to wear a suit. But my sister, who is also a staff attorney at the Eviction Defense Network, she did trial advocacy all 3 years, and she hasn't lost a trial once. Not once. She hasn't.
I'd also throw in a plug for some of the clinical courses, because a lot of what you're talking about are fundamental lawyering skills, like interacting with a client in a culturally sensitive way, getting information that you wouldn't otherwise get if you hadn't learned some of the techniques of ensuring that you get all the information that someone has to give you. So I would like to think that in the clinical courses I taught, people did often learn something that they might use in the real world. But I can't really comment on the value of law school because I didn't go to law school.
I didn't take any of those clinics, Gary, because I thought I was going to be doing something else. So maybe there might be. I think you should take Spanish or Korean. Yep. You can. The law school doesn't offer those courses, but you can easily sign up for those courses through UCLA, and that's definitely the most helpful thing. If you can speak a language that your clients will be speaking. And it's hard, but immigrant communities, there's no reason to be shy. We are so proud and happy and grateful when we hear someone speak in broken Spanish. So, you know, I would give that a shot.
I will plug the clinical programs. I think that's one of the most incredible investments that law schools have been making over the last 5-10 years. And I think that, you know, just everything from, as Gary said, being able to, you know, meet with a real client to, you know, where you have opportunities to actually, you know, go to an administrative hearing or to a court. These, you know, just having that little bit of experience of knowing how it is to hold yourself in a courtroom, how it is to, you know, walk in there, who it is that you talk to, where you're not just kind of like, you know, you're not just walking in there cold, I think is incredibly important. You know, I know in particular, the Veterans Rights Clinic, I know that, you know, professors Sunitha Patel and Jeannie Nishimoto. Jeannie has been is a fantastic, you know, it has a wealth of experience as a housing attorney. So I mean, these classes are available to you, these courses, and I highly recommend them.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this panel. Thank you to all our panelists. It was just really inspiring to hear about your work and all the ways in which the community can get plugged in. I think it's a great way to launch the Public Service Challenge and the Rand Schrader Pro Bono program. So thank you to everyone who has made that program possible. And thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
nice
you.
seeing everybody.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you.